Hello friends, I'm Vikrant Thakur and today we'll try to understand the basics of Livewire events. So let's begin. Okay, so if we see the documentation here, it says the goal of actions in Livewire is to be able to easily listen to page interactions and call a method on your Livewire component and re-rendering the component. Okay, so what I've done is I have created a picture which tries to explain the overall architecture. If you see here, on the left we have a page open inside a browser which has three components, and on the right side we see the server which hosts the component. Basically, right side is our Laravel-Livewire application. So what happens is this you're seeing in circle is the template of the component, and the component class is here on the right hand side. So whenever we wish to call a method on a component, what happens is Livewire, which is actually in control of all the components in a particular page, that Livewire engine listens to all the events fired by these components. And based on the type of event, it could be a request for an action. For example, if you click on a button and the button wants to call a method on this component class, so that will be of type action, or you can say call method. Another type of interaction is when a component fires an event, so that could be a custom event, and that event is also captured by Livewire here, and accordingly a request is sent to the Livewire on the server, and appropriate methods are called on the server side by all those components that are registered as listeners to the event. Okay, let's see that in action. What we'll do is we will create three components. Okay, this is an Laravel application with Livewire already installed on it. So let us go to terminal and create some components. So the command, as all of you know, is php artisan make :livewire component A. And okay, at the same time we shall create all the components. So we have three components now. As you can see here, these are the templates. Okay, and these are the classes inside HTTP Livewire. So what we want inside our component is public property called message, and we also want a function inside our component. Let's give it a name, function A, so that we know that we are inside component class A. And let's, inside this function, let's assign the value to the property message, and let's say function A invoked. All right, and let's copy this and paste it in other classes. Let's call this function B. Here we go, and inside component C also let us do the same thing. Okay, so these are the component classes, and in the component templates, let us create a header, and inside that let us render the property value, and let us also provide a button here which when clicked will request Livewire to call a method on the component class on the server. Let's call it call a method, and on click, here comes the important part. To fire Livewire events, we use wire colon and click equals and function name, let us see, because this is the name of the function on the component class. Yeah. So when we click on this button, Livewire intercepts this event and decides that this is a request for an action, for a method call. So it appropriately constructs a request and sends it across to the server. Okay, now let us use this Livewire component in our main view, and that is events demo. So okay, we have already written the code. So we have already used the 3 Livewire components here. Okay, let us finish the remaining components also. Component A we have already done. Let us copy this and paste it inside the template for component B and C. Okay, so now I think we are ready to refresh the page. Okay, so now we have the page, we have the 3 Livewire components. Okay, and inside the template we should also display a message that helps us identify the components. So let us give it a name, component A. Component B, all right, and component C. Let us refresh the page. Okay, let us open the DevTools, and now we should notice what happens when we click this button. So if we refer to our slide, whenever you click a button on a component and we are requesting an action, what happens? Request has been made to not the events demo page, but to Livewire/message page. If you see the request here, see? And important thing to notice, the request payload. In the updates attribute, you'll see the type of the request is call method. So Livewire in the browser is requesting Livewire on the server to call a method, and the method name is function A. So the control goes to method A in the component A class here, and in this function the property is changed and this value is assigned to property message function A invoked, and this is returned back to the Livewire on the client as a response, and Livewire on the client accordingly re-renders the component with the latest changes. So this is what happens. All right. So similarly, if we click here, call a method on component B, same thing will happen. So this is a second request, again to the same URL, but this time type is also same, call method, but the function name is different. Component is different, function is different. Similarly, here, third request. Livewire URL is hit with component C as target, and the type of request is call method, and the method name is function C. And C, function C is invoked, property is changed, and you can see the change property here. So this is how the action works, right? Okay, wire click. If we go to the events section, it says that Livewire components can communicate with each other through a global event system. As long as two Livewire components are living on the same page, they can communicate using events and listeners. So this is what happens. All the events go to the Livewire client in the browser, and those events are propagated. Actually, it's not events that are propagated. Based on the events, requests are created and sent across to the Livewire on the server. Let us see how this happens. So there are three ways to fire or emit an event. Let us see the first one. We'll copy it and inside component A template, let us add another button which emits an event or fires an event. And this is a custom event. And the way to call or fire a custom event is using $emit. And inside this, the name of the event. Let us name it custom event. And what other thing that we need to do is on the component class, we must register the listener. We want this component class to listen to those custom events and act on them. So how do we do that? We define a protected listeners array and inside that we say that for this custom event we want to call this function, handle custom event. You could name the function anything you wish. Now let us define this function. Let's copy it and name it. We do not want any parameters. And inside that, let us this time set the property accordingly. We'll say custom event handled by me. Okay, now let us see what happens. Let us refresh the page. This is the second button. Okay, we forgot to provide the title of that. Fire, or rather emit an event. Refresh the page. Okay. Now you need to notice what happens when we click on this. See, a request has been made again to the same endpoint, targeted to the same component. Why this component? Because the Livewire on the client here, Livewire knows which event is registered with which listeners. Livewire knows that custom event can be listened to by component A, and that is why it sends the request to component A only. And see, this time the type is fire event and not call method, right? And inside the payload, the custom event name is there. And you see the return back message that you got is custom event handled by A, right? So what happened was this request was sent across to the Livewire on the server, and this Livewire knew that the component A is the listener. So the function inside A was invoked. Which function? This function, because we have mapped the custom event with this function. And in this function, we change the property message with this message, and accordingly, the response was created and sent across to the client. Okay, let us do the same thing with another component. Let us copy this code and put this inside component B. Now our component B is also able to listen to the same custom event, right? And if component B handles this event, this sets the message accordingly. Now, when we go to the application and refresh the page, now we have not clicked anything. Now the Livewire on the client side knows that for custom event there are two registered components, component A and component B. So when we click this button and custom event is emitted, the control goes to Livewire on the client side here, and it knows that there are two registered listeners. So Livewire creates two requests, one for component A and one for component B, this and this, and two requests are sent, and inside those components, those events, custom events are handled, and two responses are sent back to the client. Let us see. See, we have just clicked one button on component A. It has just emitted one event, but Livewire knows that there are two registered listeners, A and B. So it creates two requests, one for component A here, fire event is the type, and another one is component B here, same fire event. All right. So you see, clicking on one event has been communicated to two components and they have reacted to it. So this way you can fire events in one component and see the changes in other components, and this is a powerful feature. Okay, so this was one method of, or one way of emitting or firing events. We have used this one. This is the way, method A. Now let us see method B. Method B says instead of firing an event on the client, we can fire the event on the server itself, on the component class. Let us see how this happens. So let us go back to our code, and inside component A, should we do this in A? Yes. Okay. And what we will do is, when we click the button button. Which button? This button. We want to call a method, call an action, right? So we want to call a method on the component A, and when the control goes inside this method, this one, we want to programmatically fire an event like this emit and name of the custom event. Now what do you think should happen when we call this function A from the client? Do you think that this function fires an event on the server, and on the server side itself the components listen to the event? For example, component B is registered to listen. See, so do you think that on the server itself control will pass to this component and this will be called? Really? Okay, let us see. So if you think this is how things happen, then there should be only one request and one response. Okay, let us refresh the page. Let us call the method, and we are expecting just one request. Okay, but there is no one request, there are three requests. Why did this happen? Okay, let us try to investigate. The first request was because of the click on this button, which created a call method type request, and Livewire on the client requested the Livewire on the server to call a method inside this component A. Now when the component A is reached and control is passed here, the property is changed, right, which you saw here. Okay, actually the message was overwritten because of the second request. Okay, so the first request came here, and after changing the property, it emitted the event also. But see what happens. If you carefully look at the response, inside this you will find, okay, let us copy this and view it in a JSON view. In this one. If we paste the response here, and if you see closely that besides the changed HTML, which was function invoked, see, you also get this emits property which says a custom event has been emitted. So you see, and this is very important thing you have to notice, the event is not handled by the server, the component B on the server or A on the server. Component A, which received the call method request, just in the response just added this attribute that okay, I want to emit this event. So basically no event is fired on the server, it is just the response object which in which an attribute is added saying that I want this event to be fired, so please take this response back and handle it. So what happens is this response is sent back to Livewire on the client, and now Livewire knows that a custom event has to be fired, and Livewire knows that custom event, there are two listeners for custom event. If you see closely in the code, component A also is registered for custom event and component B also registered for custom event. So what Livewire does is it creates two requests. new requests. One you already saw, this one. This was the initial one, and these two were newly created, and they were meant for the event listeners component A and B. See, if I click this and go to headers, the type is file event. If I go to component P, type is file event. These individual requests are sent to the respective components. Fine, and then you see the response. This time the response is custom event handled by A, and that is what we see here. Component B, the response is custom event handled by B. So the thing to notice here is when we clicked on this method requesting for a method, the type was call method, and in response we got a emits property, and this emit property, this here, said that events this custom event has to be fired. Livewire takes note of it and knows that two registered listeners are there, so it creates two requests, fresh requests of type fire event, and sends them across to the respective components on the server, of course through the library. Okay, so this was the second method of firing events, and the third one is from global JavaScript. Okay, so this needs to be coded inside the main HTML page, the main view, and which is events, or rather this one. So this is the main page. This is the yes. To listen to the events in JavaScript, we need this kind of code. So we'll go back to our code here. Custom convert, simply alert, and this should be that's right. Now when we refresh the page, you see the event has been fired from JavaScript and is been handled by JavaScript itself. So these are the three ways that the events are fired in Livewire. So I hope this video would be helpful in understanding the concept of firing of events in Livewire, and I'll try to get back with more useful videos. Thank you.